Why is Bikurim 1 week after the day Yahushua resurrected? I forget where we can confirm that because I know in the past it was a week earlier. Yeah, in the past, well, it's not that in the past was a week earlier. In the past, we thought it was a week earlier, um, because of a couple details that we had not, or I had not, taken in account. So in Leviticus 23, we have the feasts, and let's see. And you shall bring an offering made by fire to Yahweh for 7 days. On the seventh day is a set apart gathering. You do no servile work. Um, so that is matzot, the 7 days of matzot. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them, when you come into the land which I give you, and shall reap its harvest, then you shall bring sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. So now, after dealing with matzot, starts to deal with the feast of the Omer Reshit, the beginning of the count of the Omer. So right there, we see there's a separation. Now, the separation, for instance, just to mention both thoughts, back in the day, since this verse says that that feast would be celebrated until they would enter the land, then it seemed like it was still connected to the previous one, and still there was a point that I wasn't taking into account so much that I'm about to mention. So just to show that here we finish the feast of Matzot. Then there's a separation for Yahweh. Once again, starts another commandment or another feast. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them, when you come into the land which I give you. Obviously, at that moment, he was referring to the promised land, Israel, in the literal sense, but in the spiritual sense, it refers to Mashiach resurrecting, because the fact that Mashiach resurrected gives us eternal life. It allows us to enter the promised life in a new world. So the true promised land. And therefore, when Mashiach resurrected, was the time when the Omer Reshit could be counted or could be fulfilled. So that's why after Matzot, the feast in which his death and resurrection manifested, then there had to be a day in which the feast of the Omer Reshit would be fulfilled through Mashiach, which I'll explain in just a bit. But just like there's a count in which we are at the moment, by the way, um, the Sunday was the first day of the count. So today is the third day of the count of the Omer. And we have to count 49 days. And then the 50th is Shavuot. That represents the Jubilee, which is the 50th year of the count of 7 sevens or 7 weeks of years. And therefore, it fits with the end times when the last Jubilee will happen, so that the wedding of the Lamb manifests. And remember that Shavuot represents the wedding of the Lamb, yet the time when Shavuot manifested after Mashiach and when he gave the Ruach HaKodesh, when Yahweh gave the guarantee of salvation, kind of like the groom when guarantees the bride that he will marry her. So that was when the new covenant, in a way. Also remember that through the blood of Mashiach, he paid for the bride. So Shavuot was when that was already set and the bride was being promised that marriage would happen. But from then on, we would count until the end of times, um, when the actual wedding of the Lamb will manifest, as we see in Revelation 19. So, as I was reading here, speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them, when you come into the land which I give you and shall reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. Now, since we're here, let me just open the Hebrew one. To the priest, and he shall Wave the sheaf before Yahweh for your acceptance. I'm gonna start mentioning some things about the Omer Rashid. So so that, well, hopefully I don't confuse anybody because I'm gonna mention some details that I mentioned in the book, declaring the end from the beginning. Although it's not in English still. Hopefully it will soon, but um for now I'll explain it here. This this feast, one of the or two confirmations of when it happens. Another thing that I guess I'm more like to show. Just a second, I'm sorry. Here we have the calendar, and we see how well it says Bikurim. As I have mentioned, Bikurim, since it is the count to Shavuot. In the scripture, we see that Shavuot is called Bikurim, so this would be the Omer Rashid, the beginning of the count till we get to the first fruits given in Shavuot. So, but here we have it on the 26th, right? So it's interesting that first fruits or the Omer Rashid, the beginning of the count, happens on the 26th of the first month because Yahweh is one. He would come as the first to fulfill the first feast, Yahushua. And the name Yahweh has the numerical value of 26. So then we count 49 days until the 14th, and then the 50th day, which would be the 15th of the third month, that is Shavuot. That's important also because the 15 is the numerical value of Yah, right? So we have the count of the Omer in the numerical value of Yahweh, and the 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 ending of the counting of the Omer ends on the day 15, which is the numerical value of Yah, the first half of Yahweh. So if we go from Shavuot to the Omer Rashid, we would have Yah and then Yahweh. And that also connects with the wedding of the Lamb, because it would be like Yah being Mashiach and united with the other half being the congregation. So going back to something else I wanted to mention. Yeah, here we see that he would have to wave. That's verse 11, the Heinif. So, well, in the book, I explain how these letters give us a revelation letter by letter. But the fact that he would have to wave connects with the fact that when Mashiach left, he was resurrected on the Shabbat, but at night. So then on the first day of the week, that's when he saw Miriam and he told her not to cling to him. Then he went up to the Father. Then he came to the disciples, all by the feast of the by this feast of Matzot. Then he left again. But 8 days later, the scripture says, 8 days later, he came back to them. The first time that he went to them, the 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 disciples were there except Thomas. So when he came back 8 days later, uh, he was there. His name means twin. So there are a couple ways of seeing that, because some interpret that he was a twin. Others interpret that he looked so much like Mashiach that they called him twin. Either way, for instance, if he looked so much like Mashiach, remember that Mashiach is the first, and the last would be his brother, and it could be seen as a twin in a way, because remember that Metatron, or Michael, the Malach, known as Michael, he is called also in at least books of Judaism, he's called a twin. Metatron is called the twin of Sandalphon. And in other books, Metatron is said to be Michael. So Michael would be a twin. And that Malach is said to be the priest in heaven, at least the heaven of the Malachim. So if Metatron is the priest and he's a twin, then when Mashiach comes and the twin is there, Thomas, then um, he acts as the priest that is checking the first Omer, or the first fruits of those that would resurrect for eternal life, being that Mashiach. So the twin as the priest in heaven, or the fact that looks like Mashiach, and Mashiach is the high priest. So he gives us authority of priests and kings. So he gives Thomas the authority of a priest who happens to be called twin. So he's like the Malach in the heavens, who is a priest and a twin. So Thomas does the role of priest. Mashiach, the sheaf that would have to be brought to Yahweh. So Yahweh obviously remains the same. The sheaf would be Mashiach, the first of those resurrected for eternal life. And the priest would be the he right here. And the waving would be the fact that Thomas was waving in his faith. He didn't know if he would believe the disciples or not. He said he wouldn't believe until he would touch Mashiach, right? So, and he shall wave the sheaf before Yahweh for your acceptance on the morrow after the Shabbat, the priest waves it. So, because of the interpretation of the um, the Pharisees, next to the interpretation of the Shomronim, and the and other interpretations regarding this verse, that depending on the calendar that they have is the ways they interpret this verse. Um, for instance, here it says, "And he shall wave the sheaf before Yahweh for your acceptance on the morrow after the Shabbat." Since even though there's a break right here, that afterwards you kind of see clearly, but before that, not so much. For instance, in the Talmud, in Judaism, they see it, and that's why I was influenced by that at the beginning. They see it as, um, since they had not entered the promised land, this had to be said, but they kind of remain during within the same week of Matzot. So when it says here on the morrow after the Shabbat, they believe is Pesach itself. So since the feasts are called Shabbats as well, they say that's Pesach. So first fruits is the day after. So they celebrate first fruits one day after. And that would make no sense because Mashiach didn't resurrect one day after his death. He resurrected 3 days after, first of all. And remember that they had to enter first, and that meant Mashiach resurrecting. And he had to be resurrected in order to present himself before the one who would be representing the priest. So we started to see that this break is more important, as in the Feast of Matzot was over. Now, another interpretation for another calendars, and that was the one that I mainly would adhere to, but like I said, influenced by kind of ignoring this portion here, was that the Shabbat that is talking here, that is mentioning here, is not talking about the Shabbat being the feast of Pesach or Matzot, but he's talking about the actual Shabbat of the week. So first, I was under the impression, as others with their calendars, that this Shabbat would be the Shabbat during the week of Matzot. So it would be right here on the 18th, right? And Mashiach resurrected on the 18th. So he kind of went with that. It kind of fit because it says on the day after the Shabbat. So it would be on the 19th, right? The Shabbat would be the 18th. The 19th would be the day after. That would be the Omer Reshit. However, there are some other things that I will just show just a second, that also confirm that because of that part that I mentioned, this Shabbat is actually referring to the next Shabbat, as in, if you go in order, Yahweh already mentioned the whole week of Matzot. He already mentioned the 7 days of Matzot. And then he spoke about another feast and said, when you enter the land. So he's separating a lot the first feast of Matzot with this other one that he's about to mention of the Omer Rashid. So when he says Shabbat, he's referring to the following Shabbat right after Matzot, not about the not about the Shabbat during Matzot, right? Hope that's understood. And I'll continue, and it will be even better, I think. And then he says, and he shall wave the sheaf before Yahweh for your acceptance on the morrow after the Shabbat, the priest waves it. And on that day when you wave the sheaf, you shall prepare a male lamb, a year old, a perfect one. So it's interesting that Mashiach, as the lamb, came back during that same day to see Thomas. A perfect one as an ascending offering to Yahweh, right? After he had ascended to the Father, like he told the week before that Miriam that he had to. Then he says, and its grain offering, 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, an offering made by fire to Yahweh, sweet fragrance, and his drink offering 1/4 of a hin of wine. And you do not, and obviously there are also important things right here. I just wanted to get straight to the question itself. And you do not eat bread. This is important. And you do not eat bread or roasted grain or fresh grain until the same day that you have brought an offering to your Elohim. So this is going to be key. You do not eat bread. Bread, verse 14, is the word lechem, right? So lechem means regular bread. And we have here, when we talk about the Feast of Matzot, it says unleavened bread. 7 days you eat unleavened bread. So during those 7 days, you must eat unleavened bread. No regular bread, just unleavened. And that is verse 6, just to show it in Hebrew. It says, the Feast of Matzot to Yahweh, 7 days Matzot you shall eat. Matzot. So if those 7 days you got to eat matzot, and now Yahweh is telling us regarding the Omer Reshit that you do not eat bread, regular bread, lechem, or roasted grain or fresh grain until the same day that you have brought an offering to your Elohim. So it is on that day of the Omer Reshit that you are allowed to eat new bread. So you could eat bread, but with the grain or the well, yeah, the any material that you needed that was from the previous harvest. So that harvest that is new, you can only eat of it until the Omer Rashid. But the point is, I repeat, that if this day, as some believe, according to their calendars and the interpretation of the previous verses, was talking about the first day of the week during the day of Matzot, you would not be able to eat lechem on that day either. So why would it say eat bread until this day, right? Because on that feast you can only eat matzot. So it's telling us, even though on the 22nd, on the 23rd, on the 24th, on the 25th, you can eat bread already with leaven, do not eat bread with new grain, made with new grain. The new grain bread, lechem, you wait until the first day of the week after the resurrection of Mashiach. I hope that's understood. If not, let me know. But another point before closing with this question. You see how it says until the same day. Until the same day. That's 14. It says, and lechem, all right, you shall not eat. Ad etzem hayom hazeh, which is until the same day. Let me take you to the translator. And, oh, hold on, Hebrew. So we have to this day, right? Now, if I take away this day, it says until now. So because it's pretty much saying until that very moment, right? Until that very moment of that day. So this is until, at, which happens to also be witness, aid, right? And you know how witness has to do with the end times, the two witnesses. But remember that Thomas was acting as a witness when he um saw Mashiach. Let me go to John chapter 20. Now look at this. When therefore it was evening on that day, the day one of the week, and when the doors were shut, where the taught ones met for fear of the Yehudim, Yahushua came and stood in the midst and said to them, Shalom Aleichem, peace to you. And having said this, he showed them his hands and his side. The taught ones therefore rejoiced when they saw the sovereign. Then Yahushua said to them, Shalom to you, as the Father has sent me, I also send you. And having said this, he read on to them and said to them, receive the set apart ruach. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they have been retained. But Thomas, called the twin, so you see how they make reference to that exact thing during the story, the twin. So that refers to one of two things. That he is like Mashiach, so therefore a priest, which we receive that authority through him, of course. And second, that he is the Malach, who is called the twin, who is the priest in heaven. And not only that, remember that the count of the Omer from today till Shavuot, well, not today, from the day that we are studying today, which was a few couple days ago, right? On the 14th of April, started, and the count goes all the way to Shavuot. And look where Shavuot is. Not only 15, which is the numerical value of Yahweh, in the middle of the month, which is an important position, as in the middle of the menorah, but it is in the constellation, the sign of uh, Gemini. So the twin, right? The twins. And now we have here the twin, one of the 12. So the twin, one of the 12 months. The twin, one of the 12 months, right? So we start with the count of the Omer all the way to the month of the twin. So that's why the twin checks the Omer, the sheaf, as we saw in Leviticus. So as I showed here, right? Let's say, let me see how it will translate it if I just write 8, just until, you see. But this is also witness, like I mentioned. And Thomas is going to work as a witness. Now, if we just write etzem, says closed. But if I write it without the, in Hebrew, is also bone. Let me show you here. You see, etzem, right? Same word. That's bone. So when it said until that same day, it could be interpreted as the witness of the bone, or to the bone, on that same day. On that day, I should say. Same would be the etzem. So witness of the bone, or witness to the bone. If we continue to read Yahuhanan, but Thomas, called the twin, one of the 12 months or signs, was now with them when Yahushua came. So the other taught one said to him, we have seen the sovereign. But he said to them, unless I see his hands, the mark of the nails, and put my finger into the imprint of the nails, and put my hand into his side, meaning until I touch the bone, pretty much. I won't believe until I'm a witness of his pain, well, of his scars, his um open wound, because he wanted to put his hand into his side. So, and put my hand into his side, I shall by no means believe. So his faith kind of went away, and it would go back if he would be able to touch. So, like waving the sheaf, waving the faith. And after 8 days, right? So he had appeared on the first day to them as he did to Miriam, which had to do with the first question that she wanted to hold to him, but he had to go. But then the rest saw him. They did touch him, held him with strength because they loved him, but they were not trying to keep him. Um, then after 8 days, so we count from that first day, we go all the way to the first day of the other week, which would be the Omer Rashid. After 8 days, his thought ones were again inside, and Thomas was with them. I'm sorry, I added a word. And Thomas with them. Yahushua came, the doors having been shut, and he stood in the midst and said, "Peace to you." Then he said to Thomas, "Bring your finger here and see my hands, and bring your hand and put it into my side. Into my side." This is powerful because not only, again, it is being fulfilled that he is a witness, aid, and he's going all the way into Ad Etzem, until the bone, until touching the bone, pretty much. And I repeat, on that same day, mentioned in Leviticus as the day to begin the Omer Rashid. And that also has to do with Elohim taking from the side the congregation, the woman, Chava, Eve, right? So, and bring your hand and put it into my side, and do not be unbelieving, but be believing. And Thomas answered and said to him, "My sovereign and my Elohim." So he confirmed him, and his faith was also confirmed. Yahushua said to him, "Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and have believed." Also, in the book of Jubilees, there are like 15 verses, kind of, well, some around that, maybe 10, that speak about the feast of Shavuot being on the 15th of the third month, being at the half of the month. And therefore, if you count 50 days backwards, you get to the 26th of the first month as the Omer Rashid, known also as Bikurim, although Bikurim is mainly referred to when talking about Shavuot. So also when Mashiach stayed, and I guess we can see this one, it says here, and when he was 12 years old, so when he turned 12 during Aviv, the first month when he was born, so he turned 12. If he wasn't born on the 12th, I mean on the first month, I mean, um, it's interesting that they mentioned that, because why would you say that half a year after he turned the age, right? You would normally would mention the age, like specifically, without mentioning anything else, during the time when he became of that age. So when he turned 12, that was on Aviv, because that's the month he was born for many reasons. And I say that because many people believe he was born on Sukkot. And once again, in my studies, I have come to believe in Aviv, even though I went through that teaching and then understood why it wasn't as I thought. So that's why I mentioned it, right? So also, he was 12 years old. So he turned 12. He, as the light of the world, right? The light of the world literally is the sun, and the sun has to go through 12 houses to um, make the year. So he becomes of 12 years of age, like the 12 houses. So now he has come to the first um, circuit of childhood that he had to fulfill. Because when you go to the 13th year, then you are becoming a man, pretty much. Um, right? 13, you're a teenager. So And when he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem according to the practice of the feast. When they had accomplished the days, meaning when they have fulfilled the feast. So the feast ends on the 21st of Aviv, the last day of Matzot. Then it says, when they had accomplished the days as they returned, the child Yahushua stayed behind in Jerusalem, and his parents did not know it. But thinking he was in the company, they went a day's journey and were seeking him among the relatives and friends. And not having found him, they returned to Jerusalem seeking him. So if they stayed until the last day, that would be the 21st, then they left on the 22nd. But they went for a whole day. So that takes us to the 23rd. They walked for a whole day, the 23rd. Now, going back. And it came to be after 3 days that they found him in the set apart place, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. So after 3 days, we were already on the 23rd. So 1, 2, 3. On the 26th of Aviv, the day of the Omer Reshit, he went to present himself once again as the chief among the priests. And it came to be after 3 days that they found him in the set apart place, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. And having seen him, they were amazed. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you done this to us? See, your father and I have been anxiously seeking you." And he said to them, "Why were you seeking me? Did you not know that I had to be in the matters of my father? I had to be in the feast, the matters of my father." But they did not understand the word which he spoke to them. All right. Because it's interesting. She said, "Your father and I have been anxiously seeking you." And he's like, "What you mean? I was with my father." Right. Obviously, he respected Joseph, but this was referring to the spiritual aspect of his mission.